Yes, the African Union yesterday, of course, suspended Niger Republic from the continental bloc with immediate effect. The latest of a number of sanctions on the West African countries since last month's coup. The decision was announced yesterday after a meeting with the AU's Peace and Security Council in the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa, and comes after several Western countries cut aid to Niger due to the July 26 coup that overthrew President Mohamed Bazoum.
The ousted President Bazoum has been under house arrest since the takeover orchestrated by members of his presidential guard. Recall that the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, also imposed sanctions and last week agreed on a D-Day to begin a military intervention through an already activated regional strike force. Let's now bring in global affairs analyst Collins Nweke, who joins us to dissect this conversation. Good morning and thank you for joining us. All right, Mr. Nweke, please, would like you to unmute your device as we get into the conversation on what's happening in Niger this morning. It's been a series of negotiations between the ECOWAS, attempted negotiations, and more recently, Niger let us know about their 3-year transition period, which ECOWAS has strongly kicked against and has said that it's ready to intervene with the military. Now, we do have the African Union that has now imposed its own sanctions. Would you say that these are fitting moves? First, from the ECOWAS rejecting the 3-year transition timeline, and now to the African Union imposing further sanctions?
I will hope that what the ECOWAS is doing is actually, strengthening its negotiating position, because that you have something on the table when you are negotiating with someone is completely different from when you have nothing at all. So the military juntas wouldn't even see them to a point where they have, presented a timetable. Now, rejecting that timetable is probably, a logical thing to do, but establishing a back door through which you go in to see the military juntas and begin to negotiate the timeline, the timetable, is also another thing. So I hope that is what that they are doing, that they are not just saying, we don't want to have it and that is it. That's on the part of ECOWAS. Now, coming to the AU, I think it's part suspending Niger from the AU. If you go by their playbook, should have been one of the first things to do. But perhaps, the construction was allow them time to see if, they could make any meaningful move, meaningful in the interpretation of the AU in terms of restoration of constitutional order before suspending them. So the suspension is neither surprise nor abnormal, and indeed it falls within the series of sanctions that are planned and will be unleashed in the coming months.
All right, what does Niger stand to lose from being suspended by the AU? Like, what are the major benefits that AU member states have been able to get in the last decade, maybe even more, that Niger will be cut off from?
Well, the suspension actually comes with a number of implications. First and foremost, it doesn't look well for national integrity that, you are actually yanked off, a union that you were supposed to be a part of. Now, there is political, but also, economic benefits, at least perceived benefits of, being part of such a union. In itself, that suspension in itself is not enough, of course, to, cause any serious damage to them, but in combination with other things and the consequences that comes with it, because
all right. Seems we're struggling with a connection with Mr. Nweke. We're hoping that he can join us back. And just before that disconnection, he was attempting to answer what exactly Niger might stand to lose by virtue of being suspended from the African Union. Okay, we have Mr. Nweke back. Please go ahead.
Yes. So,
the technicalities of working with the internet, these are expected. So yes, Mr. Nweke, do we still have you here with us?
Well, I still have you, and I can hear you very, very clearly.
All right, please go ahead.
Countries, members of the same union are now tied with this suspension because those, who are desirous to continue to do business with them, even when they do not approve of what is going on there, will be obliged on the basis of this ban to cut off, links with them. So that African Union outside the African continent, would, following the ban, following the suspension, to also cut off both political and trade deal with them. So essentially, the key word here is isolationism. Now, the strategy of isolating them, pushing them to the wall, actually begins with some consequences. Now, how that translates to actually, stifling the military juntas is a different, kettle of fish, because what I have just said previously are just the theory. Whether people will continue, whether countries will continue to, trade with them, whether the financial flows will continue to happen in an illicit manner, of course, are concerns that, people have experienced and expressed in the, in the such suspension ineffective.
All right. Mr. Nweke, I'd like you to also talk to us, you've talked about isolation in this particular instance. Is this how regularly do we see the African Union stepping in and imposing sanctions on a number of these countries? This is not the first coup we're seeing, although interestingly, the Niger Coup seems to be the most popular in recent times. How regularly do we see the African Union step in, and what really is the strength of the influence that they wield amongst these countries, beyond being this body that we all know and so seemingly respect? What is the strength that they wield over these countries?
Well, you and I, Olive, know that, at the moment, and that has been there for quite a while, the African Union has been, enjoying the nickname of, a toothless bulldog, that simply barks but never bites. Now, it didn't just come, it came as a consequence of inaction in a number of, places where they are meant to act. They simply talk. Where they are meant to take, proactive steps and proactive actions, they rather take reactive ones. And so, yes, in the past, they have hesitated in the first place to actually institute, suspension and other sanctions on erring members, especially when their friends are at the end of affairs in those countries. And when such, sanctions come, they are so little and so late. And that is why, people have questioned both their fairness and their, neutrality, but also their effectiveness. Now, in the case of Niger, they couldn't afford to look the other way, because we have to understand that one way or the other, Niger is emerging as the battleground of, the war between the West and Africa, the struggle, for the resources of Africa. So, to some extent, it is also being questioned whether some of these actions taken against Niger are actually instigated by the Western powers, because they are not just one, that actually have interest in Niger. And it is now up to the African Union, the ECOWAS, and the other blocs to actually prove that their actions are internally grown and it has nothing to do with any pressure from anywhere. And I believe much needs to be done to ensure that they convince watchers that that is actually the case.
Well, it might be hard to convince, because if you look at the way things have played out, it really looks, like the African Union and ECOWAS are really just playing the script of somebody else, not like they care that much. And of course, AU did mention, that they are against the involvement of foreign mercenaries or foreign, military forces and all of that. But of course, if you look back at when Laurent Gbagbo took over from, or rather was kicked out of office, and replaced by Alassane Ouattara, I'm not sure who now. Yeah. And of course, the involvement of France in that issue, there was a foreign military presence or foreign interference. If you look at what happened in Libya, there was foreign interference and foreign military interference. The African Union didn't do anything or say anything in those moments. And so it's just a little funny seeing where they stand and the moments that they choose to take a stance. So I would like that you speak a little bit more on the so-called stance against military interference from other countries and why they may not be seem very honest in this moment.
Like I alluded to earlier on, Osaro, Africa, with the Niger coup, it is emerging that Africa has become the new Niger has become the new battleground for, control of Africa in terms of influence over its economy, over the, natural resources that are coming out of Africa, but also its vulnerability within the, the world order. We are aware of the fact that the United States of America has strategically chosen Niger to build the highest, drone operations in the world. As a matter of fact, that is for strategic interest. And you see, so some of those things are very glaring. People see them, and so ultimately, indeed, like you mentioned, a bit more blunt than myself, when you said that they can convince the world that indeed they are, the African Union, the ECOWAS are acting under the instructions of some of these Western powers. But we also need to be very careful in determining who genuinely is the friend of Niger or the friend of Africa, because it is an aberration. It remains an aberration for you to be giving up one imperialist, power that has held sway in your country or in your continent for so long, only to be embracing a new one. In this case, I'm talking of the potential exit of France and the potential, as a matter of fact, the effective entry of Russia, into some of these African countries. One has to be, very careful in assessing who, on the basis of their actions, are really friends of Africa, or if this is the continuation of that scramble for the resources coming out of the continent.
All right. We've seen that most of the AU sanctions are usually after these actions have happened, right? To punish unconstitutional overthrow of government. We've seen a number of sanctions implemented between 2000 and up until 2022. I think there's been a number. I think 20 sanctions I read, to see that. But my question is, what can they do to become proactive as opposed to being reactive, as opposed to them making sure that they are acting after the fact? What can be done? Are there measures that can be implemented to prevent us from even getting to the point of the overthrow of government where they now need to step in with sanctions?
Absolutely. For that to happen, of course, is guiding rules, the guiding rules of, some of these regional groupings, particularly the AU. I will, one way or the other, keep ECOWAS, on the sideline for now, because it is specific on, economic integration. AU is more overarching and its mandate is broader. So let's start from there. The act establishing the AU, the Organization of African Union at the time, has got to be revisited. The concept of far-reaching respect for the sovereignty of, the individual member countries has always been cited for a reason to keep away in what is seen or perceived to be, the internal affairs of the country. So that way, they claim that, it ties their hands in terms of moving in preventively, to forestall some of the menaces that are going on there. If that is the case, well, they need to revisit, that notion of sovereignty and how far the AU can go in stopping bad things, from happening. That's number one. Number two, and equally important, maybe even more important, is the fact that, they have looked on for so long, tolerating bad old men, holding sway in these African countries without actually, calling them out and, taking steps to, for instance, elongate one's stay in office beyond the constitutionally, approved one. Now, I'm not saying that it is wrong. Countries like Germany, for instance, Britain has open-ended terms of office, so you can run for office as long as the people elect you. Hermann Kohn of Germany stayed for years and so on. So you can change the constitution, but you cannot be a beneficiary of the same change that you instituted.
Yeah.
Because
all right, Mr.
what
Wike.
is that you're actually doing it for yourself. So those are things they need to
Obviously, the model and practice of democracy in across the continent needs to continuously be refined, and it needs to be trusted by the people, because as of today, a lot of countries across the continent do not trust in what we call democracy to, of course, lead them forward and to be sincere with the people. It's not democracy as we were told that it was. But thanks a lot for your time. We always enjoy speaking with you. We will bring you in again pretty soon.